Welcome everyone, my name is Robius, and today I bring you another episode of Assassin's Creed: The Real History, the series where we compare the representations of characters and other elements depicted within one of the Assassin's Creed games to their actual history. Please be warned of major story spoilers ahead. For today's episode, we'll be exploring the history of the Virginian soldier and politician best known for being George Washington's older half-brother, Lawrence Washington. To start, we will explore his early life during the pre-game history, then we will cover his life in Assassin's Creed Rogue during the in-game history, and lastly we will summarize the differences between his actual life and his portrayal in the game. Starting with the pre-game history, Lawrence was born in 1718 in Virginia to Augustine Washington and Jane Butler. There aren't many records concerning his youth, however it is said that his father brought him and his younger brother, Augustine Jr., to England in 1729, where they were enrolled in the Appleby Grammar School to further their education. Their father would soon return home to find that his wife had passed away. He would eventually remarry to Mary Ball in 1731, with whom he would later have a son named George Washington. Having finally completed his education in 1738, Lawrence returned home to Virginia where he joined in the management of his father's plantation, eventually purchasing land under his own name to increase the property size. As the British government wished to increase their presence in the West Indies, they established an infantry regiment in the American colonies which could be used against the Spanish. Colonel William Gooch was given the task to commission new colonial captains for the 4 recently created battalions. In mid-1740, Lawrence was given the senior captain's commission for the Virginia Company. By the end of that year, their ships sailed for Jamaica, arriving in early 1741. The expedition was commanded by both Brigadier General Thomas Wentworth and Vice Admiral Edward Vernon, under whom Lawrence served. This campaign included many confrontations with high casualties, such as the expeditions to Cartagena, Cuba, and Panama, all of which Lawrence survived while acting as one of the Marine captains. One of the deadliest challenges faced was the exposure to yellow fever, which killed a large percent of the colonial forces, while many of the British who had already been serving in the Caribbean for a year were rather unaffected. Washington was extremely lucky as he had been transferred to the less crowded and mainly British-filled flagship of Vice Admiral Vernon, thus allowing him to generally avoid the disease. Lawrence finally returned home with the other colonial troops in late 1742, after General Wentworth was called back to Britain and the American regiment was disbanded. Once back at home, he was made an adjunct major in the Virginian militia. In 1743, Lawrence Washington married Anne Fairfax, with whom he would have 4 children, none of which would survive childhood. Soon after, he renamed his family's property near Little Hunting Creek to Mount Vernon in honor of his commanding officer during the War of Jenkins' Ear, Vice Admiral Edward Vernon. In the following year, he was elected to Virginia's House of Burgess, which was their assembly, as a representative to Fairfax. By 1747, he used his new influence and worked with wealthy landowners and businessmen, including his new father-in-law, to establish the Ohio Company of Virginia, which would profit from the creation of extended trade through the Potomac River. Within the next year, Washington helped gather the votes needed to choose a location for a new town which would benefit his company. The town was to originally be called Alexandria, but it was then renamed Belhaven. In this time, Lawrence's younger half-brother, George Washington, became far more involved in his life due to the death of their father, and so he participated in the creation of this town. During these years, Lawrence became George's role model, inspiring him to pursue a military career and teaching him in the ways of surveying and trigonometry, while also increasing his interest in theater, music, and novels. George even accompanied Lawrence in his many visits to the warm springs, which were needed due to the fact that he had been diagnosed with tuberculosis. By 1751, the disease had truly taken a toll on Lawrence, and therefore he took a trip with George to Barbados in hopes that it may help with his sickness. At the time, the younger Washington was also suffering from smallpox. Unfortunately, the voyage was not as helpful as had originally been hoped. This would be the point where we first met Lawrence in Assassin's Creed Rogue, as Shay eavesdropped on his conversation with his fellow Templars, where he asked them not to involve his brother George in the affairs of their order. Once back home, Lawrence Washington eventually succumbed to his tuberculosis and died at Mount Vernon in July of 1752. The property would stay in his wife's name until her death, when it was after passed down to his younger half-brother, George Washington. In summary, despite Lawrence Washington having a rather short appearance in Assassin's Creed Rogue, the writers chose an interesting way to include him with only a few minor differences historically. First, evidently he was not a member of the Templar Order. Secondly, he was not killed by the assassin Shay Cormac, but instead died of tuberculosis around the same time. I liked how they made references to the fact that he helped George begin his military career, and how they explained the reason why he wouldn't have wanted him involved in their plots. Lastly, I found it rather interesting how the game had him thanking Shay for giving him a swift death as opposed to permitting his illness to slowly kill him. With that final fact, we have finished another episode of Assassin's Creed: The Real History. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you did, I highly recommend you try out one of the Assassin's Creed games. Thank you all for watching. Please leave any suggestions for future characters, groups, events, or locations from any of the Assassin's Creed games that you'd like me to cover in the comment section below. Please rate, comment, and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you all in a future historical episode.